As promised, I'm joined now by a Liberal MP out of Victoria, Tim Wilson. Thanks very much for your company.
Thanks, Peter. But can I start by extending my condolences to the family of the doctor who's lost his life? That's a terrible story and a terrible outcome. No,
well said, it is. And it is, what do you do? He's there at his place of work doing good work day in, day out, and then he confronts a situation like that. It's one of the reasons why the whole issue of crime intermingled, or alleged crime, with, health services is a pretty vexed policy area. Let's get into some other issues, though, if we can, Tim Wilson. I want to ask you about the black hand function that Christopher Pyne addressed now so infamously with that recording surfacing. Were you there?
No, I wasn't, Peter, and there's a very simple reason why I wasn't. It's because I'm part of a new generation of younger MPs who I think probably look beyond this divide between moderates and conservatives and actually focus on the challenges confronting our nation and interested in what we can do to drive the policy agenda and the choices that Australians need to make for the 21st century. And that, I think, has to focus on a united front, on a front that focuses on the values that have always united us as a party, translating into policy so that the choice that people see at the next election is a Turnbull government that's projecting the future of the country in a sustainable future that respects and provides security for the elderly and opportunity for younger Australians versus Labor's approach, which is essentially whatever they can do to advance their own interests.
See, a good call by you on that reasoning and rationale, part of a new generation, not interested in all of that sort of stuff. Why were there 150 people there, largely young people, to hear from Mr Pyne? I mean, that's part of the problem, isn't it?
Well, Peter, as you know, I'm not involved with that, but I think there is a yearning for a full breadth of liberalism. I mean, one of the things that bothers me is that people think that parties should always be perfectly united on policy. If you want to take a frontal lobe lobotomy and simply go to a party that's united by policy and not by values, you join the Australian Labor Party. If you want to enjoy a party that's united by values, but there'll always be differences of opinion on policy, you join the Liberal Party and you share those values. And so there are people within the Liberal spectrum, and I'm one of them, who believe very strongly in social liberalism as well as economic liberalism, and particularly younger people aspire to that. And that's why you'll get people gravitating to those who advocate for those positions.
OK, sure, but let's just call this what it is now. You have a former Prime Minister who is attacking the current Prime Minister for not doing enough on 18C, when the former Prime Minister backed away from doing anything on 18C and Malcolm Turnbull tried. You've got a former Prime Minister attacking the current Prime Minister about taxes going up, when the former Prime Minister put up the deficit levy, which saw the top marginal tax rate increase. You've got a former Prime Minister attacking the current Prime Minister about the renewable energy target, when it was the former Prime Minister who put in place the renewable energy target. Malcolm Turnbull's frustration was on display at having to deal with all of this messiness when he was fronting a pretty big infrastructure announcement around the Snowy Hydro just earlier today. Can you understand his frustration?
Well, of course I can understand the frustration, but I think the focus always has to be on what actually matters to Australians. And we've got, as you know, there's obviously debate around marriage for same-sex couples at the moment. I'm sure you'll ask me questions about that. The truth of it is we have to always be focused on the issues that affect the broad spectrum of Australian population. And these sorts of issues that come up from time to time, the way people might go from values to different positions of policy, is entirely consistent with the Liberal tradition, but we have to do it respectfully and also be mindful of the fact that we should do it in a way where the public thinks that we're actually contributing to benefit the country, whereas sometimes they can be presented as us being interested in ourselves and not interested in them. And that's what the Prime Minister is trying to get past, is focus on the things like rail infrastructure in Victoria, which makes a big difference to making sure people can live in rural and regional areas in Victoria, get jobs, secure affordable housing and actually improve their lot.
You mentioned same-sex marriage, and yep, I'm absolutely getting to it, Tim Wilson. I want to ask you about it right now.
I thought I might as well do it on my terms, Peter.
Why not? Well, here's what I really want to know. I spoke to Craig Kelly, who hails from the Conservative end of the party. He would acknowledge that. I'm sure you would as well, just earlier this week. He said that the party can decide what it does after this term of government for the next term. It may go for a free vote on same-sex marriage. It may go for the plebiscite again. He personally would like to see it go for the plebiscite again, but his view in tandem with that is that it has to stick to its election commitments a la the plebiscite for the entirety of this term. What is your philosophical view on all of that?
Well, my view is consistent with what was announced by Tony Abbott in July of 2015, which is that there would be a plebiscite after next election. Obviously, that hasn't been legislated. We attempted to do so. I voted for it, despite me saying on a number of occasions that perhaps it wasn't my first preference, being a true cultural and institutional conservative. The tradition of the Liberal Party is that these issues of conscience are dealt with by a free vote, and as an institutional conservative, I believe in the Constitution and in its role of the federal parliament. But nonetheless, we took it to the election and we honoured it. And we have honoured it.
So that's
the
it?
challenge for and the other part of the press conference was that parliamentarians would have a free vote in this term of Parliament, as in it may not a bill still has to be put before the Parliament, it has to be debated and whether it gets put on the agenda, but nonetheless that people like myself and Craig Kelly and Tony Abbott voting favour or against have a free vote.
OK, but it sounds like, yeah, OK, so your position is you've honoured your election commitment, you tried to get it passed, you voted for it, perhaps against some of your views previously on this, but having tried, the second element to what Tony Abbott said in the last Parliament applies vis-a-vis a free vote going forward. What about the old saying I remember as a child, if at first you don't succeed, try and try again? That seems to be where Malcolm Turnbull now is suggesting the government might go, try again to put the plebiscite up.
Well, and if the Prime Minister chooses to do that, of course I'll support him in doing that. But I would say this, I think we're focusing too much on the politics of this issue and actually not looking at the humanity of it. You know, I have to say, you know, obviously this issue affects me. In fact, I'm the only member of the House of Representatives who's been engaged to their partner of the same sex, and we've been engaged now almost for the same time frame as the average marriage it extends itself in Australia today. So, you know, I have a personal stake in this. I'm not pretending otherwise. My view is that most Australians, frankly, don't care about this issue. There are people who have very strong views in favour. There are people who have very strong views against. But the vast bulk think that we should deal with this maturely and move on as a country, because while we're debating this, we're not actually dealing with the issues that affect the average Australian on a day-to-day basis, which includes heterosexual and homosexual Australians. Energy prices, housing affordability, making sure that people feel safe and secure in their homes, dealing with issues and challenges around migration. And that the sensible thing for all of us to do is to behave responsibly, not make the political debate about us, but to focus on the humanity and what's in the interests of the Australian people.
Relating to all of that, with my last question before we ran out of time, Tim Wilson, a viewer has sent an email in basically having a crack at this idea that Christopher Pyne was saying that the left in that speech had won in terms of the Liberal Party, you know, taken over, if you like. Now, I'm interested in getting your thoughts on that. Christian Porter, speaking to David Spears, which we've shown a little earlier, the full interview will be played out on PM Agenda. He, as a Conservative-leaning MP and frontbencher in your team, just roundly dismissed this notion that the government had turned to the left as absurdity, rattling off some of the policy positions that the government has embraced. Viewers like this gentleman who has emailed me, though, isn't convinced. He's concerned about the party having been taken over by the left, as Christopher Pyne was alluding to in that speech. Who's right? Christian Porter saying that that's not the case, or Christopher Pyne saying that that's what's happened?
Well, I'm going to answer with what my perspective is, not whether somebody's right or wrong, which is the conservatism isn't a political philosophy. It is a temperament around disposition towards change. And what's coming through with younger generation of MPs like myself is a very clear focus on the need to preserve and conserve our culture and our institutions, but to project a forward-looking modern liberalism on economic and social issues. That's where my focus is. And the more we embrace conservatism as a temperament, the more you allow your opponents to set the agenda and merely to temper the speed that they're successful. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in the alternative Liberal vision for this country, and I think that's where the Prime Minister and the government is focused.
Tim Wilson, always appreciate you joining us. Thanks for your company once again today.
Thanks, Peter.
Cheers.